Hey everybody, it's Dice back again, and I've been putting this video off for way too long, so here it is. I'll finally get back into the groove of making videos. And this video is mostly going to be about the future of Domain. I just finished releasing the first set, so it's on to the next one for now. Now, the first thing we're going over here is obviously the rares here. You can see this card right here. Well, look at that. It's got extended full art, doesn't it? Yeah, that's how we're going to do the rares from now on. The highest rarity in the booster packs. So before, I was using some kind of monochrome thing with starry looking borders and stuff like that. That wasn't ideal, but it's about all I could do because most of the artwork was, well, not most of, but a lot of the artwork was commissioned or licensed. So I couldn't really get the full card proportions for all of them. So we kind of had to make do with what we got. But from now on, I intend to be doing all the artwork for myself. So that means we can do stuff like this. We can make the art in the proportions of the full cards. So later on, we can make full art cards. So that's going to be what happens from now on. And of course, normally this card is going to look something like this. That's the common ones. And then uncommon there. And then just the regular non-fancy ones that you'll get in the non-random decks right there. And then next up, what we're going to have is epic cards. You can see here, we got an example of an epic card. This probably won't make it in to the final set. I'm already changing things from when this card was made. And of course the artwork is old. But as you can see, epic cards have a little subtitle here. What that means is, since epic cards are basically our version of legendaries, in that it portrays a specific person or place or object or whatever. But those kinds of things always have kind of a flavor drawback, in that a lot of the times the games will print different versions of the same character, and then you end up being able to just, cram your deck full of different versions of one character and have them all in play, and it doesn't really make any sense. Here we're anticipating that with the subtitles here. So what we've got is the normal title, which will be the name of the place or character or whatever, and then a subtitle which is unique to the specific card. That way we can go by the regular title whenever we're dealing with something. We can reference that title whenever we want to key something off of this specific character, or just, well, actually, obviously we're going to have like a limitation on how many you're going to have in play. Like, you can only have one in play of each title. And then we're also limiting it on the decks, so even if you have multiple versions of a character, you can only have 4 copies of that one in your deck because they all have the same title. So you might actually have a deck that has 4 different versions of the same character in it, but they all take up a slot of the same card. So that's a mechanic I'm going to be playing off of later. We're definitely going to have multiple versions of every epic card that comes across, and I'll try to keep them kind of focusing on the same mechanical niche, so there is a trade-off in deciding which one you want to put in your deck. Also, I'm playing around with some ideas for epic spells, but I'm not exactly sure what an epic spell would be in the game world or mechanically, so that's kind of Still in development. I have to work out some tweaks and play around with the idea first. But the idea of the subtitle and title differences does make the drawback of epic cards a little more substantial than it would be in other games. So that's something I'm definitely going to explore in the future, but it'll be a while. Anyways, let's talk about the decks for the next set. Alright, you see here we've got a whole slew of things in development. This is the next round of decks. The whole plan for Domain is that most of the cards are going to be released in rounds of decks. So that's how we're describing the sets. So each round of decks will have 5 decks that are all mostly non-random, and each of those decks will of course be 2 colors like you can see here. And once we get all these done, I think I'll work on kind of a second smaller set that will be basically extra epics, because we've basically got an epic unit and an epic territory for each of the decks. So until we get more cards put out, the whole epic drawback will kind of be pointless, because there won't be a second version of each specific thing to force you to consider opportunity costs. But once that's done, then I think we'll do a full-on booster product that combines all the cards from the decks plus from the epic set in between. And then after that, we'll do another round of decks and so on and so forth. Now, as you can see, we've got like all this stuff laid out in Magic Set Editor. And even if your game is not like Magic Set Editor is a very nice little database to keep all your game data stored and organized. You can get your own templates and stuff. If your game's more like a different game, they've got different templates for other games and stuff like that. It's really nice when you're trying to flesh out an idea of a whole set. So if you're a TCG creator, get yourself Magic Set Editor, because it will help your workflow so much. Anyways, the first deck we're focusing on here is the Eastport deck, which is blue-black. Now, Eastport is the largest city on the continent of Kiranoth, on the Endless Seas, which is the world of Domain. And this deck features a little mechanic we're calling Elusive. Basically, this is a form of evasion for your units that lets them sneak by bigger units to, attack territories and deal some damage. So the way Elusive works is that it focuses on your size here, the second number. So if you've got smaller size, you cannot be blocked by units with a bigger size. So basically, the smaller you are, the harder you are to pin down, is how it works. And to that end, we've got like some enablers like Cursed Edge here, like the little equipment I showed earlier. It has a drawback in that it has a -1 to anything it's attached to on size, but that can work to your advantage when you're dealing with elusive guys, because smaller is better, until you hit 0, of course. And then we've got cards like Dwindle, which is basically, it's like removal. You can kill something with it, but if your guy is big enough, you can shrink him down and make an elusive guy get through faster. So there's some enablers for that. Now, the next mechanic I want to talk about is mostly in this deck here, Sandlands, and this is the idea of expending manpower. So basically, it's a little alternate cost where instead of expending resources, you expend units up to a certain size, or of at least a certain size, and you can expend multiple units but to reach the desired size, but like one unit cannot be expended for multiple activations is how it works. And we're also doing the same thing for strength here, which basically is just different flavors of the same mechanic. So expending strength basically means that you're sending out your units to in a show of force or whatever. This card here is Dangerous Pass. It's basically the idea that you're sending your guys out to raid a caravan or whatever. So that's why it keys off strength. And then we also are using this on spells because, well, for a little flavor, this deck is basically, it's based around orcs in the game. And for orcs, one of their key features is that their magic is mostly musical in nature, so it's a lot of chants and stuff like that. So the spells in their decks are also going to use the manpower expenditure mechanic as a cost in addition to the regular supplies. So you can see here we've got Hymn of the Fallen Wall. Basically, it's a way to take out a territory without launching an attack, and in doing that, you just have to expend a bunch of your guys to deal damage directly to it. So we're using some kind of weirdo notation because it doesn't really work in Magic Set Editor here. I actually have my own symbol that I can stick up right in here, right with the normal costs, which would be down on this side actually in domain. And that'll be included just in the regular formula bar here. Now this round of decks is also going to be the first one to have multicolored and colorless cards in it. So what we've got going on there is, with the colorless, it's basically going to be what you'd expect. They'll probably have resource modes that can produce both colors. They might have a little advantage over the regular ones just because they have the normal cost and whatnot. That's already a drawback in and of itself. All the color or the multicolored cards in this round of decks are epic territories though, so there's not a whole lot of design space I'm filling out with these. Then we have, of course, the colorless cards, and in domain these are going to be flavored as mercenaries. So basically, since they're colorless, they don't really have allegiance to anybody. They're just swords for hire and all that. And each deck is going to have its own type of mercenary. We've got a round of 5 different ones in this. Each has 2 abilities that you can activate that key off a certain color of supplies. So basically the idea is that you can pay them more and they'll be better supplied to fight your enemies. And then whatever kind of payment you give them, whatever supplies you give them, that affects the abilities they have. So these guys, the Vicious Hirelings, they're the orcs of the mercenaries, and if you spend some black on them, they'll get deadly ability for the turn, and you can spend red to give them initiative too. So that's going to be different for each one. They'll each have a 2-color combination, and the resource mode will probably also be like your typical dual color resource that enters tapped or expended. Excuse me. We're also going to have a tribal deck for the Trell, which, if you don't know, it's our race of tree people that are unique to domain. So we're going to have a whole deck devoted to them, the green-white one. And the mechanic I'm thinking about for them that I haven't really put into action yet is time counters. So I want to start adding in the idea of counters into domain, and I want to start with time counters because they're pretty simple. Basically, the idea is that they'll have an ability where at the start of each turn they get an extra time counter on them, and then of course once you reach a certain threshold of time counters, something happens. That's the basic gist of it. We don't really have anything fleshed out, but basically it's going to represent the idea of Trell like growing their own armies and stuff like that. Plus we'll have ways to manipulate time counters. So instead of the whole idea of like time magic in domain being represented by like taking turns and stuff like that, we're going to do it with time counters, and they'll be more prolific in later sets probably, just depending on what we need. And last but not least is armor, which is probably the most recent idea I came up with, just because I needed a new regular ability, especially in white, for the mercenaries in particular. And you can see here they've got armor and a number, and the number basically determines how much damage is reduced by. So armor reduces damage from each source of damage, so it's consistent. So if a unit with armor goes into combat and gets blocked by 3 units, it'll reduce damage from all 3 of those units by the number of armor. Now that actually is pretty good, I think. It's a little powerful, so we might just forego using a number for it and just stick to like armor prevents 1 damage from each source and just leave it at that, so it's a little easier to balance. We're still working on this one. I need to test it out a little bit before I finalize anything, but that's the basic gist of it. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about it. So thanks for watching. I hope you're as excited to do more domain as I am, and why don't you let me know what you think about the stuff that's in the works. What do you think about the mechanics and stuff? Tell me down in the comments, and I'll see you later.